Approximately 55.3 million people die each year. That's roughly 150,000 people per day and 6,000 per hour. Now that's a lot of deaths. So what does this have to do with my topic? Well, nothing. I just wanted to get your attention. But it does bring up a very important emotion you are all feeling in some sort of way. And that emotion is fear. In your case, you fear becoming a scary death statistic. In my case, I feared ISM. When I began ISM, I feared so many things. I feared the application process when Coach Goff literally evaluated whether or not we were competent to be in the program. I feared the first day of school when we came and we were told that we had to present a speech the next class. And I feared every single one of my informational interviews. However, every cloud has its silver lining. Honestly, fear was the reason why I decided to join ISM, because I feared the unknown future, the fact that I wasn't dead set on a profession. I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. So this emotion really just drove me to enroll in a class that would serve as a looking glass into the near and frightening future. Prior to this class, I always had a huge interest in foreign cultures and policies, and people always told me that I would do really well in business, but I never really had any experience with business personally. However, I did grow up in a very culturally diverse environment because my parents are immigrants from China and I grew up in America. And here are two pictures of my family, and they're my parents and my sister, and my parents are the most inspirational two human beings that I've ever met in my entire life. They really teach me so much, and like their whole story on how they came to America is just so impactful and inspiring. They moved here when they were 30, and like they had a lot of like tough adjustments because they lived in China their entire life for 30 years, and now they had to learn to adapt to a new culture, a new society that they had never really experienced before. And on top of that, my mom was actually pregnant with me at the time, and her doctor told her, strongly advised her not to hop on a plane and fly across to the other side of the world, but she still did it anyway, and here we are now. And I'd say that they adjusted pretty well to the whole American society. So this type of setting really created a huge fascination in cultures for me, and I really this interest just grew more and more as I got older and started taking classes like history classes or geography classes in middle school and high school. A little bit more about myself. I have always been surrounded by music. I started piano when I was 4, and I joined the 6th grade band in middle school, and I've also led worship team at my church for quite a few years. To say that music and I have an unbreakable bond is truly an understatement. So you're probably all wondering, when is she going to stop talking about herself? Let's get to the research and the fun stuff. So I'm just going to add one more thing. I am a dreamer, and I love to imagine. And many people believe that it's pointless to dream, but according to the famous Carl Sandburg, nothing happens unless we first dream. So this is an overview of my ISM accomplishments, the product of my dreams. So I'd like to start off with the interview process. The first interviewee that I had was Jim Anderson, and I was so nervous for this interview because this was the first time I really had to talk to a professional in the real world with like talking about real business, where they looked at me as not as someone who was just a kid in high school, but as the same level as them. And I'm really thankful of Mr. Jim Anderson, because he was the perfect first interview to have. He manages an export trading and consulting company called Etc. International, and he was so understanding during our interview. He knew that I was very nervous. He probably could tell, and I was stuttering and my voice was shaking, but he just made me feel really at ease once we talked for a little bit, and I wasn't feeling nervous anymore. And he gave me time to look through my notes, look through my questions to like figure out which questions I wanted to ask him next, since it was my first. And I was really glad that he was my first interview to have. And my next interview was with Mr. Gonzalez Martins, and this was the big guy. He is the head of industry at Google, and when I first found out that I landed an interview with him, I was so blown away. This was an amazing opportunity for me, because I would have never thought that I got to have an interview with the head of industry at Google. Like, that's a pretty big deal. And he helped me a lot about how I can be prepared for the real world. He told me to continue to maintain decent grades. He told me to keep up with the news because that was really important in international business. And he told me to think about other areas besides just business because I'm only 16 right now. I have so many ways to improve. I might change at any moment, so to really get to know all sorts of different sectors and areas of interest besides just business, and that he hoped that ISM would be able to do this for me. And he also told me to take internships very seriously because normally when you go to college, when you go get a job, everyone has good grades. Everyone can, well, a lot of people can play sports. There's a lot of people in orchestra, band, and choir, but the main thing that really differentiates you from other people is experience, because many people don't have that. And that was something that he really told me, and it really impacted me, and I've been thinking about it for quite some time. My third interview was with Mr. Dice Nakamura, and he is actually my mentor. And he's the vice president of global sales at a company called Chemical Information Services. And this, I'm going to elaborate on it more since I have a whole dedicated mentor section for him. But the reason I chose him to be a mentor was because he was really relaxed. I loved his workplace environment. It's not a really big company, so it's kind of small, and they're really laid back. And I was just really interested in what they were trying to do. Their services just made it really interesting for me. And along with that, at our visit, he gave me a lot of resources. He gave me this huge stack of papers, and basically they were all the criteria and requirements for every single job in business. And he just told me to look over it, read it, and just get an understanding of all the different types of business jobs that you can get and what different companies were looking for, because that's really important. And I'm going to elaborate on him a little bit more later. For my fourth interview, it was with Mrs. Valerie Bostrom, and she is the Director of Network Operations at Carrington. And this interview was a little bit different from the ones that I had before because she really incorporated her personal experience into the whole informational interview. She lived in London for 3 or 4 years a few years back because of her job, because the company needed her to be in a different location. And she told me that she felt all different sorts of emotions when she was there. She felt really lonely. She was thousands of miles from her loved ones, and she had to cope with this with no one around her because she didn't know anyone. And it was a really tough adjustment for her to make. And that really just showed me it's almost like the cons of international business, that you have to be away from your family and you can't be with people that you love, and you're going to have to feel lonely at sometimes. But that was so important to me because I was able to realize that, because before I had glorified international business, wow, I get to travel as a job, but traveling also has its cons. There's also negative parts about going across the country and all over the place. And finally, my last interviewee was Mr. Bruce Bernstein, and he is the Vice President of Global Sales Development at Munro Sutton in Carrington. And Munro Sutton is a British dental business health care kind of program thing that they have in Britain, and Carrington is the American side of it. So he kind of gets to travel between Britain and America a lot because he kind of works at two companies. And the main key point that I got out of his interview was this one quote that he told me, and it was, "The squeaky wheel gets the oil." So when I first heard that, I was like, well, what does that mean? That has nothing to do with business. But then he told me this, who is worth the investment? Who wants it more? Because there's so many people out there in business who want your products, who want your services, who want to be seen. And you have to know which ones are worth investing in, because if you choose the wrong person, then that could truly change a lot of outcomes. And the more squeakier the wheel, or the louder the customer, the more they want it, and then the more they'll get the oil, which is their product. And so that concludes my interview process. I'm actually very glad that it's over because the interviews were such a scary experience for me. But I did gain a lot of useful information out of talking to these business professionals in their real work environments. And on to the next section. This is my mentor, Dice Nakamura, and as I said, he's the Vice President of Global Sales at Chemical Information Services. And I found him on LinkedIn, and it's actually very interesting how I got in touch with him because, see, I sent him an email over LinkedIn, and he responded back saying, "Is this for real? Can I talk to your teacher to confirm that ISM is actually a real thing?" So I guess he thought I was pranking him, which is actually a really stupid prank because I don't know why anyone would want to prank you by setting up an interview with you, but I guess he's had a lot of those, so he thought I was pranking him. But luckily, Coach Goff and him, they figured it out. I gave him her contact information, and they worked it out, and we got to set up an interview. And so what his company does, Chemical Information Services, they provide databases and services to people specifically targeted in the pharmaceutical area. So let's say a company wants to find hydrochloric acid because they want to make some kind of, I don't know, product. And so you take their service and you type in hydrochloric acid in the search box, and below you will pull up all of these different companies and manufacturers that have hydrochloric acid and are willing to sell them to you. And through this you can easily find whatever chemicals you need or for your stuff, and then that's their main product or service, and it's called the DWCP. They have many other things like Pathfinder, which is like a marketing tool, but the DWCP is really their main product. It's what they started off with. And so what Mr. Nakamura does in this company is he develops the business plans and the paths that they want to take for their company. He also manages the sales team, so he has to look at the revenue, the income, and the things that you have to pay in order to gain. And he also gets leads, which is like a fancy business term for clients or customers. I'm not really sure why they call it leads, but that's what they call it. And each visit with Mr. Nakamura is very interesting. He always tries to incorporate all different kinds of business aspects into each of our mentor visits. Each of them, none of them are ever the same. At my first visit, he brought in the company chemist, and I got to see how he, a sales director, works with the chemist, which normally you think people like these would never really work together, but they actually do. And another time he brought in their company marketing analyst, and I was able to, they pulled up this huge Excel sheet, and it was just full of numbers and strange acronyms and words, and basically we sat through the entire hour and they would just explain the whole thing with me. And by the end of it, I was able to understand all of it. And just at my previous mentor visit, we were actually at an off-site quarterly meeting, and I only got to stay for the last hour of it, but coincidentally, they were actually talking about SMART goals at the time, and this was whoa, we just created SMART goals and everything, and I got to see how SMART goals are actually implemented into a business kind of setting, because originally when I saw the SMART goals assignment on the Student Learning Hub, I was like, oh, it's just something that Coach Goff found off the internet, or something that she just thought would be a good learning experience for us to do. But companies actually use SMART goals. And at the offsite meeting, they would split up into different groups. So there would be the sales team and the technology team, and they would make their own SMART goals for their entire team. And then at the end, they would all come together and they would present it, and they would critique each other on whether or not it was specific, if it was achievable, or whatever the rest of the acronym is. And that was kind of eye-opening, because I realized that in ISM, we actually do things that people in the real world do. It's not just a normal class, because in school we in pre-cal right now, I'm learning about ellipses and conics. I don't think businesses will ever really use that, but businesses will use SMART goals. That's something that's been implemented into our ISM curriculum. And finally, Dice Nakamura also helped me on my final product idea, and I'm going to elaborate on that later in my original work and final product section. So for my research section, I had so many articles, but I chose the top 4 that I felt helped me the most through this year. And the first one is called Overview Marketing Mix: Product, Price, Place, and Promotion, or also known as the 4 Ps. And these are basically factors contributing to how well your service will do in a certain market, whether foreign or domestic. And the reason why I chose this as my number one most important was because when we went to UNT, I actually sat in a marketing class, and surprising enough, they were talking about the 4 Ps of marketing. So I could follow along with what they were talking about. I wasn't completely clueless. I actually had an idea on what they were talking about. So that was really helpful to making sure that I learned as much as I could at our UNT trip. And my second article is called International Business Competence in the Contemporary Firm. And this was like the big article. This was like 27, 30 pages long. There were huge words in it, all different sorts of acronyms that I had to Google, and I had to highlight it and annotate it because we have to do that, but I had to do more because there would be words that I didn't know, and then I'd have to write the definition down on the side of it. So it was really tough to read, but it had so much information in it. It told me about small businesses and how they are able to compete with larger businesses, especially in the foreign markets, and gave me terms such as SMEs, which just basically stands for smaller businesses, or KPI, which is the key product indicator. And with this article, I got a lot of business terms that I wouldn't have normally learned in a school setting, and that was really beneficial to a bunch of things because I could talk about them at my mentor visit, and he'd be like, "Oh, you're so educated." I was like, "I know." And my third article is the white paper for my mentor's company, Chemical Information Services. And a white paper is kind of like an advertising tool, except it's targeted toward people who you feel like would actually want to use your product. Instead of using billboards or commercial advertisements, white papers, it's just like a few stacks of paper. It's not really big, and just gives you information on what the product is, what their company does, a little overview on their whole company. So if you're really interested in what they're doing, you can just read through this and then get a better picture of their whole company as a whole. And finally, my last most important research article was a complete breakdown of the different types of business degrees. And I chose this one because this article was very eye-opening for me because I'd always been so centered on international business. But after reading this article, I was able to see all the different kind of paths you could take as someone who wanted to go into business. There was business with healthcare, and there was something called general business, and there were just so many paths that someone could take in business. And this also helped me with my original work, and we will get to that right now. So my original work and final product, originally I had an idea of creating an app for business professionals that was pretty similar to Tinder. So I had to download Tinder, create myself an account, and then kind of use it a little bit so I could see how it worked and everything. But I don't think I'll ever be using it again after this. And yeah, that was my original idea. But after talking to my mentor, it changed a little bit. So my original work was originally going to lead up to my final product, and now it kind of does, but indirectly. So here's some pictures of my original work. I basically drew blueprints for the app that I was going to create, and it may not seem like a lot, but it actually was because I had to research I had to download tons of different apps so I can see all the different ways on how they created their sign-in and login screens, and then I had to develop my own sign-in and login screen for my app, and I had to come up with ideas on how everything was structured, where everything would be, all the buttons and the places that you press and the slidey side things. And normally when people think of apps, they just think, oh, if you just press this button, it goes here. But really, it's so much more complicated than that, because you have to think, well, if you press right here, what is it going to do? And what is it not going to do? Because you have to, there's so many aspects to app building, and just by drawing a blueprint, I was able to realize all those things. So imagine when I create my actual app, how many more things I will learn. So here are a few more pictures of what it will look like. And another part of my original work was to use a software called App Inventor, and unfortunately I wasn't able to put it onto this because it wouldn't let me put a video onto the slide for some reason. I don't know, but I couldn't really I tried putting videos, I clicked insert video, but then it would just ask me to insert a YouTube video, and I just didn't try that, so I'm just going to explain it to you. And so App Inventor, I got this software by asking the computer science teacher here, and he referred me to one of the app development teachers at the CTE Center, and he told me to use App Inventor because he realized that I didn't have a lot of education and knowledge in coding, and that's a huge point, like a huge part of creating an app. So he gave me this software, App Inventor, and even though there wasn't any coding involved with it, it was actually really, really difficult. Like, this part took me like 8 hours because I had no idea how to use the software, and I had to go on YouTube and find all different sorts of videos, and the videos weren't even helpful. Like, they would teach me how to create like a bouncing ball game, and I don't really need to make that. I'm trying to make a business app, not a game. So I had to use common sense and think like, oh, so if they press this for a ball, then I should press this for a button or something. And like, it was really difficult for me to do, but for my original work, I was able to create the first two screens of my app. And unfortunately, I would show it to you, but I can't. So yeah, and now I want to elaborate on my final product. So with my mentor's help, my final product idea changed. So that means my original work doesn't lead directly to my final product anymore. My new idea for I'm still creating an app, except it's going to be a little bit different. Instead of being a Tinder app for business professionals, it's going to be a communication app between employees and job seekers. Because many times, people who are looking for jobs, they don't really get the whole aspect of a company. But by talking and communicating solely with just people who are working at the company, they can gain insight on the culture in the company, on what employees believe they need or don't need, and on whether or not, like, if they like it or not. So by gaining all this insight that you wouldn't be able to get from a recruiter, it would really help people who are looking for jobs. And you may think that my original work might be useless because now it doesn't have anything to do with my final product, and I just kind of drew some pictures but it really does, because honestly, it really showed me how much work I'm going to have to put in my final product. And it also made me realize that I didn't want to use App Inventor anymore because it only creates apps for Androids. And I have an iPhone, so it's really difficult for me to see how my app is coming along on an actual phone when I don't even have an Android. So I've decided that I'm going to have to get ready to learn how to code. And I've bought a few courses online, and I have friends and family who can help me, and I'm just ready to get all in that technology business because it's for my final product. And in conclusion, I've learned a lot in this first semester of ISM. I really thought I would never get this far. I came to class the first day. After hearing that we had to present a speech, I was like, oh crap, I have to talk in front of all of these people. And look at me now, I'm talking in front of all you guys, and I'm actually not feeling that nervous at all. So things have changed a lot in just one semester, and I was so stressed and confused at first. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know why I was in the class. Actually, at one point, I was thinking, why did I sign up for this class? But I'm glad to be in the class now. And I've done so much more than I could ever imagine. It's just been wonderful being in this class. I've learned so many things I would have never been able to learn just in a normal school setting. And I hope to accomplish more in this coming semester and to reach those goals that I've been dreaming. Thanks. Was that too short?